Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Coming up on our program, the fierce election battle ahead in California's primary and legislating expiration labels to cut down on food waste. Plus, remember the Fonz, Henry Winkler's current happy days as a New York Times best-selling author. But first, history was made this week when President Obama traveled to Cuba. It was the first trip by a U.S. sitting president in almost 90 years. Mr. Obama met with President Raul Castro and even took in a baseball game. While the trip was meant to be forward-looking, it was clear that deep disagreements about human rights issues remain.
I believe citizens should be free to speak their mind without fear, to organize and to criticize their government, and to protest peacefully, and that the rule of law should not include arbitrary detentions of people who exercise those rights.
Oakland Congresswoman Barbara Lee was one of 7 California lawmakers who joined President Obama on the trip. She joins me now. Congresswoman, thank you for being here.
Happy to be with you.
Well, we'll get to Cuba in just a moment, but I wanted to ask you first about the Brussels attacks. They happened while you were in Cuba. How did you find out about them, and what was your reaction?
Well, first, the horrific attacks in Brussels, are an example of kind of the real threats that the world is faced with. I heard about them immediately when I woke up early in the morning, turned on television, and was shocked, quite frankly. Here we were in Cuba, and then, the terrible terrorist attack occurred. And it just reminded us all, even while we were trying to make progress 90 miles away from America, that we face some very real threats, that we have to ensure that first of all, our country is safe. The rest of the world, our national security apparatus, I think our Homeland Security, they're doing a fine job. But it also reminded me that there's no military solution, and we have to really make sure that we embark upon and continue with an engagement that does not add more hostility, more violence, and more threats in the world, which means we have to have a comprehensive approach, solution, work with our allies in the region, and try to disable, dismantle, and destroy ISIS in a way that doesn't create more terror and more hostility.
Can you expand on that, on the comment you just made, there's no military solution? You were the only member of Congress to vote against authorizing use of force following the September 11th attacks. Would you support authorizing use of force against ISIS now?
First, let me say, we have seen, as in Afghanistan, that was a blank check, and it authorized the use of force in perpetuity. And Afghanistan is still a nightmare. Iraq is still a nightmare. And so the use of force in Afghanistan and Iraq did not work, quite frankly. We need, and we cannot have these open-ended perpetual wars. So we need a coordinated strategy that's, the military strike is always there. I mean, military action, the use of force, the president can always use that. But we have to find a way to address the root causes of terrorism, and also a way to support the allies in the region to come up with a diplomatic solution, as well as make sure that our counterterrorism initiatives and strategies are working in collaboration with those in the region. But most Pentagon officials will tell you that military action is not going to address the terrorism that we're faced with in the world.
And in the meantime, we do seem to be having some luck with the airstrikes. In fact, today, Defense Secretary Ash Carter announced that they were able to take out a top ISIS leader in Syria with an airstrike. Wanted to also ask you about your Cuba trip, of course. You've been to Cuba at least 20 times.
At least.
For 2 decades now, you've been a strong voice advocating normalizing relations with Cuba. What types of major changes have you seen over the years in Cuba?
My first visit to Cuba was probably in 1977. And it was a very interesting period then. Of course, no Americans were there at all. I went with my predecessor, a great leader, Ron Dellums, and of course, Belva Davis went with us, and we put together a film called Yankee Come Back. We took a delegation of healthcare experts, educators, bankers, business people to really look at the realities of Cuban society. Fast forward to today, what you see now, you see many Americans, you see I see just little things like more paint on buildings. For a while, the Cubans could not purchase paint to paint buildings. That was not a priority. It's a very poor country. But also during the, quote, special period, as they call it, after the Soviet Union left, I can remember very vividly that there were very few of those beautiful cars on the road because people could not afford the fuel costs, and more people were riding bicycles and walking. And while food was very hard to get, the rates of diabetes went down, and their health indices in terms of some diseases went way down because they had more exercise and they were walking more.
What about the human rights issues, though? You know, lack of freedom, reports that dissidents are still being repressed by the Castro regime, despite the president's statement this week that there are no political prisoners. Do you share those concerns?
Well, first of all, you have to really look at human rights in an international context. We have an international treaty, international standards of human rights. And I think if every country, and you look at Vietnam, you look at China, you look at most countries in the world, we've got to address human rights in a very real way. And I'm very pleased that human rights and those issues are on the table, but I also know, and the president was absolutely correct, to talk about human rights in our own country. When you look at mass incarceration, when you look at, you know, racism and institutional biases, and so we have issues here. The important thing, though, is that people in a democracy, in our form of a democracy at least, we have the right to petition and to try to change the government. And so I think it's important that human rights be discussed, but it's also important, as the president said, to talk about, you know, it in a comprehensive way where we're not the only country telling Cuba they better get their act together on human rights, because we have issues we have to deal with our own self.
And speaking of President Obama, you endorsed him back in 2007 over Hillary Clinton. In the current presidential race, you have not endorsed anyone. Why not?
I have not endorsed anyone because I want to see this primary process play out. I think it's very important for people to raise their voices, to get engaged, to get organized, to get mobilized. I believe Bernie Sanders has really helped shape the debate, you know, has helped put additional issues on the table that probably would not have been debated. And I think it's what's most important is that we engage young people, seniors, people of color, and that we have a massive effort to get the vote out to make sure that Donald Trump and Cruz are not, whichever one or whomever, will not be elected. And so I'm going to engage and make sure that when I'm needed to make sure that people get to the polls to vote for a Democrat, I am definitely going to do that.
And that's when you're going to step in and hopefully
right.
have an announcement then. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
California's June primary, usually considered too late to make a difference, could be critical this year. This week, the Public Policy Institute of California released a new poll of California voters. In the Republican race, it shows Donald Trump with 38% support among likely voters. Ted Cruz follows with 27%, while John Kasich has 14%. On the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton holds a 48 to 41% lead over Bernie Sanders. KQED's politics and government senior editor Scott Shafer is here now with our political roundup. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Thuy.
Well, you just heard Congresswoman Barbara Lee say she hasn't endorsed anyone. Does that surprise you?
Not really. I mean, they serve together in the House, Bernie Sanders and Barbara Lee, and I think philosophically they're very close. My guess is that Barbara Lee, like a lot of liberal Democrats, her heart is with Bernie and her head might be with Hillary as the person that she knows can probably do better in November. So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if she endorsed Hillary but voted for Bernie. But I'm sure, like a lot of people, she's probably split.
And in the meantime, we've got the June primary here in California. Hillary Clinton has been dominating the bigger, more diverse states. Does she have the same advantage in California over Bernie Sanders?
Yes and no. I mean, she does do very well among Latino voters, but not a huge advantage like we've seen in other states. She does very well with older voters, 45 and older. She's got like 63% support, but he does very well, of course, with the younger voters. You know, the electorate here, Democrats and independent voters can vote in the Democratic primary. Those independent voters tend to be younger, more male. And I think he'll do well to get those votes into the primary. So she does have support from the years of both her being First Lady and her husband being president. She did very well against Obama here in 2008. So, you know, she does have some built-in advantages, to be sure. But as you can see in that PPIC poll, 48-41, it's not a runaway.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Republicans as well. How is the tumultuous campaign affecting the GOP party in California? You laugh.
I'm laughing because I think they're excited. On the one hand, like, wow, we're relevant. This June primary is going to matter. It never does. On the other hand, I think there's a worry and anxiety and hand-wringing, really, because a lot of the folks really worry about Donald Trump at the top of the ticket. At the same time, they see him bringing new voters into the process. And I think because the primary is going to matter, you're going to see, they're hoping, more Republicans come out to vote in June. That could help some Republicans down ballot, maybe the 2 Republicans running for the U.S. Senate, for example. But overall, I think there's a sense of dread, really, about how is this going to turn out? How is this going to end up come November?
Well, it's a closed primary, speaking of the Republicans, and only registered Republicans can vote. Does that play to anyone's particular advantage?
I think it does, because by keeping it only to Republicans, you're getting a more conservative slice of the electorate, and that's going to benefit the most conservative candidate, who in this case is Ted Cruz. So my guess is, and you kind of saw that too when in that PPIC poll, when they took Rubio's support out and redistributed it, Trump got most of it. So I think, he's going to do pretty well in California because of that, because of the fact that it's closed.
Well, the PPIC poll also showed that Trump does well among women. Does that surprise you?
It does, but I was out on Tuesday out in San Ramon at a women's Republican event where there were, the U.S. Senate candidates were there, and I talked to a lot of folks, women. Trump, 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 Trump. I was shocked at how much Trump support there was. So
why is that?
He's strong. He says what he thinks. He's an outsider. We need somebody to shake things up. And there's a lot of anger at the Republican Party. They feel that, hey, we control Congress. We've controlled Sacramento. We've been governor under Schwarzenegger, and nothing changes. And so I think they're so angry at the status quo that they're taking a good long look at Donald Trump.
California's primary is a little different from other states in that we don't have a winner-take-all primary. There are 53 congressional districts. Each district gets 3 delegates. What impact does that have on the way that the candidates campaign here?
Well, the vice chair of the Republican Party says it's going to be hand-to-hand combat. It's going to be like the Battle of Stalingrad, is what she said. What it means is that every congressional district, even liberal San Francisco, has 3 delegates, just as Orange County does and the Inland Empire. So if you're a John Kasich and you're looking to pick off some delegates here and there, you might strategically, campaign in certain places. But if you're a Ted Cruz, you might go to places that a Republican would never go, like Santa Monica or Berkeley even, because there are 3 delegates available in those places. So they're not just playing to a statewide audience. It's really district by district by district. And so they're going to have to go fight for those delegates.
Let's talk about the U.S. Senate race as well, because the PPIC poll took a look at that. What does it reveal about that race? Well,
Kamala Harris and Loretta Sanchez, the 2 Democrats in that race, continue to be 1-2. Harris comes in with 26%. Sanchez has 17%. And there's still a big chunk of voters, about 31% in that poll, who just don't know who they're for. Part of it is because it's been pretty much below the radar. Trump is kind of sucking the oxygen. The presidential race is getting most of the attention. But it's a little surprising to me that Kamala Harris isn't doing better. She's
raised a lot of money.
She's raised a lot of money. She's spent a lot of money, but not on things that reach voters. She hasn't been spending money on television. She's spending money on things that she's been criticized for, like expensive hotel rooms and consultants. But it is surprising to me that somebody who is as well known as she is and who's run statewide twice, like she has, is still at 26% in the polls. So she's got some work to do. She's still, I think, the one to beat in that race.
All right.
But still pretty close.
Still some time left until November, so
yes.
We'll see.
All right.
Scott Shafer, thank you.
You bet.
Turning now to what we eat. Americans throw out up to 40% of their food, according to the Natural Resources Defense Council and the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic. One of the reasons for that? Confusion over sell-by and expiration dates. KQED Science Series Quest took a look at this issue. Here's a clip from that story.
Take, for example, the expiration dates found on packaged foods.
When you're in the grocery store, you'll see a use by or a best by date. It's just for the food quality. Eat it before this date, and you have the freshest product that the manufacturer can potentially give you.
Expiration dates can confuse consumers into thinking a food is no longer safe to eat. But for most food, that's simply not the case.
If you think about a product that you can leave out in the open, soda, canned foods, walnuts, those products at their use-by date or their sell-by date, they're going to be just fine for the most part. If you're 30 days out, if you're 60 days out, what starts to happen there is the food quality is affected, not the food safety.
Well, now California Assemblyman David Chiu is tackling this issue with new legislation to simplify how food is labeled. He joins me now. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Thuy.
Well, how would your legislation change the way that food expiration dates are labeled?
Well, we wanted to address the massive challenge of food waste. We're talking about 40% of all food that's produced in the United States. It's been estimated to be over $200 billion worth of food that is discarded. And it's, for many consumers, as if you walk into a grocery store, buy 4 bags of grocery, and leave one in the parking lot. Right now, there are over 40 states that have different laws on this. There's no federal legislation in this area. Hasn't been one for the 40 or so years of discussion on this. And there are close to 24 different types of confusing labels on products.
So then how would your legislation change that?
So what we are proposing is that we streamline and create really 2 uniform standards. First, a standard for food quality, essentially a best if used by. The other standard would be for that small subset of food for which there's actually a health risk after a particular date. And we propose there be an expiration date and expires by label. Those 2, just on their own, we think would really simplify things to address the situation.
So, for example, we have a bunch of things here that I have to admit sheepishly came from my kitchen and that of our producer, Monica Lamb.
Everyone has them.
As well. So we have, macaroni and cheese here that's, expired 2 years ago. You think it's still good, even though it expired 2 years ago? And here's my own salad dressing. It expired December of last year. For example, how do I know if this is still good to consume?
The reality is we probably don't know exactly whether that's good to consume because the labels are so confusing, which is why we need to really simplify the standards. And if we're able to simplify the standards, we're able to put food to use. Right now in the state of California, we have 6 million people that go to bed hungry, 1 out of 4 kids. If we could just, for example, not throw away a third of what we're talking about, we could feed every hungry person in the United States.
So these things probably safe, including eggs after the expiration date?
Probably. Again, I don't want to speak definitively, but the issue is there is no standard. We need a uniform standard.
What are the products that you absolutely should use by the expiration date?
So there's a small subset of products that even when they're refrigerated still could create bacteria that could make you sick, typically often impacting pregnant women. So for example, deli meats, unpasteurized cheeses, certain types of sausages that haven't been fully cooked. But the vast majority of foods actually don't even need a label. And our legislation doesn't call for every food product to be labeled. We're simply saying for those food products that have labels, the labels should be simple, should be clear so that people aren't throwing out their food. It's also a huge environmental concern. Right now, California throws out over 5 million tons of food into landfills every year. We're talking over 8 million tons of greenhouse gases being emitted just in the state of California.
Those are startling statistics. Just real quickly, I want to point out that KQED asked grocery groups for their reaction. Here's a statement from the California Grocers Association. Anytime a company that sells products across state lines is required to specifically create packaging for one state, it creates distribution challenges. What makes more sense is to have a nationwide standard and not just a state standard. Can you respond to that real quickly?
Absolutely. In fact, we've been talking to grocers and everyone understands there's a problem here because of the fact there are 40 different state standards. There are 24 different types of date labels. So these manufacturers already have to come into compliance with all these different state laws. If there was a federal standard, we'd be completely happy about that. But the fact of the matter is Congress hasn't acted. We don't expect it to.
And that's why you have this legislation. Assemblyman David Chiu, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Sunday, Monday, happy day.
He played one of America's most iconic television characters, Arthur Fonzarelli, on the hit 70s sitcom Happy Days. But lately, Henry Winkler is entertaining children with a best-selling book series. Together with co-author Lynn Oliver, they've penned stories about a boy named Hank Zipzer, a smart, funny, and resourceful character who is dyslexic. Winkler and Oliver hope their books will encourage kids to go for their dreams despite the obstacles that get in their way. And we are joined now by the creators of the Hank Zipzer series. Welcome, Henry and Lynn.
Hi.
Hi.
So nice to have you here.
Great to be
We're
here.
really happy to be here.
Henry, how did the idea for Hank Zipzer come about?
There was a lull in my acting career, and my manager at the moment said, "Why don't you write books for children about your learning challenges?" And I said, "Because I have a learning challenge, number one, and because I was told I was stupid and I believe it, number two, I can't do that." So
Well, you had dyslexia as a
I
kid.
did, but I knew that. But when I was younger, I had no idea. All I knew was I was called lazy and stupid, not living up to my potential. The second time that Alan Berger suggested to me to write books, he said, "I'm going to introduce you to my good friend, Lynn." And Lynn knows everything there is to know about writing children's literature.
And I want to also point out that, I was going through the books, and it's very interesting because these books are different from your typical children's book. And I want to just give an example here of how the font in this book is different. Lynn, can you talk about that?
Yeah, the font was created by a man in Holland who is himself dyslexic and has 2 dyslexic children. He's a graphic designer, and it suddenly occurred to him that you could make the process of reading a lot easier for kids with reading challenges by designing a different kind of type. So that type is more heavily leaded, it's weighted more at the bottom so the letters don't float around on the page.
And Henry, how many of Hank's adventures are actually drawn from your own adventures and experiences as a kid growing up with dyslexia?
The emotion is mine. The emotion I've lived through, and it is true, we do not write down to the kids. So kids then write us and said, "How do you know me so well?" But the humor is exaggerated. Lynn and I have written every one of the novels in Lynn's office, and we either make each other laugh or it doesn't go in the book.
Oh, so if only one of you laughs, the idea is dead, does not go in the book.
That's right.
Except sometimes I do argue and I think and I say, "Please, let's just try this joke. If the editor says it doesn't work, I'll take it out."
Henry, you said you have struggled in school because you learned differently. People
Yes,
called you stupid
that's
growing
right.
up. You eventually graduated from Emerson College and then went on to earn a master's degree from Yale School of Drama.
Right.
What is your message to young people who face some of the same things that you faced?
It is really simple. To the children, we say to every child that I meet on the planet, I promise you, how you learn has nothing to do with how brilliant you are. That your grades in school do not define you. You've got greatness inside you. It is your job to dig it out and give it to the world as a gift. So that's the underlying theme. And then we figure that humor is the gateway for them, the reluctant reader, the reader who's having real trouble reading. It is the gateway for them to read from now on.
And Lynn, you have so much experience in children's books. You've written a lot of them. You helped start the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. You sold millions of copies of Hank books between the two of you.
We've probably sold 5 million books
Wow.
and growing.
And there's a TV series in the UK based on these books.
That's right, it's on the BBC.
Why do you think they're so popular?
Well, I think for a number of reasons. First of all, I think families who have a child who has a learning difference really suffer, and the books help them realize that they don't have to suffer, that what they have is somebody who's smart and creative and bright who just learns differently. And in our society, you're so defined by school, and your success is so predicated on how you do in school, that I think people have embraced this series because it offers true optimism.
Henry, it's estimated that 1 in 5 school-age
Yes.
children in the U.S. are dyslexic.
And we also, let me just say with this, and I don't mean to interrupt you,
No, not
but
at all.
all children have a challenge.
Yeah.
Too big, too small, too tall, can't play ball. They have got acne, or they're not good socially. The children understand that there is more than one way to solve a problem by reading these books. That Hank is resourceful. He gets himself into deep trouble. His glass is half full, he just spills it everywhere, you know?
And then he always overcomes it.
He overcomes it.
Yes.
And nothing good comes to the bully, you know.
And I wanted to learn a little more about your journey as well. Do you think there's been much progress in dealing with dyslexia as a society since when you were a kid?
There is certainly major strides that have happened. There are teachers who are being trained to teach the child who learns differently. But here it is. In America, we are teaching our children to take a test. And the teacher, it's Herculean. They have to teach the fastest kid and the slowest kid all the same information in the same amount of time. Can't be done. Somebody is going to fall through the cracks. 55% of everyone incarcerated is dyslexic. They must have fallen through some crack.
Lynn, what's the main message that you want kids to take away from these books?
I think the main message is that each person is unique, and whatever differences you have, as Henry said, whether it's a physical difference or a learning difference, that's unique to your personality. We each have our own fingerprint, and that's something to be celebrated, not something to be equalized. We're all different, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. Henry, I have to ask you, because adults of a certain age, myself included,
Sure.
will remember you as the Fonz from Happy
Sure.
Days. In fact, I was telling you earlier how Happy Days helped me learn conversational English when I first came to the U.S. As a
we are
child
very proud
from
of
Vietnam.
that
So who's more excited at your book signings? Parents who remember you as the Fonz or the kids who read the books?
You know what? It is a terrific thing because the parents come because they watched me or they saw me on Arrested Development or The Water Boy. The kids don't know me except maybe they've seen what the parents watch or the parents have shown them the Fonz. And the kids go, I love these books. How did you know me so well? But here's how great the Fonz is. He reads our books. That's how loyal he is.
And now I am the beneficiary of this because I know you as the Fonz, but now I also know you as the author.
Yay.
Henry Winkler, Lynn Oliver, thank you both for coming in.
Thank you. We
Thank you
loved
for
it.
chatting with us.
Yes. Well, that is it for tonight. I'm Thuy Vu. Thanks so much for watching. For all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org.